Shabbat Shalom, I'm Robert Barr. I'm delighted you're here joining this Shabbat service with me. I'm going to begin with the reading and talk a little bit about ourjewishcommunity.org. 6 days we speak, tonight we listen. 6 days we build, tonight we rest. 6 days we take care of others, tonight we nurture ourselves. 6 days we work to change our world, tonight we are renewed by what is eternal. 6 days we plan for the future, tonight we are enveloped in the present. 6 days we eat and drink in haste, tonight we savor the taste of bread and wine and feel the bond of the world that feeds us. 6 days we teach, tonight we learn. 6 days we hear the clamor, tonight we listen for clarity. 6 days we struggle to expand our influence, tonight we're dissolved in a greater influence. 6 days we focus our vision on the task at hand, tonight we look beyond what we can see. May each of us find our Sabbath peace. Shabbat Shalom. As I said, I'm Robert Barr. I'm the rabbi here at ourjewishcommunity.org. And I'm also the rabbi at Congregation Beth Adam that's in Loveland, Ohio. Congregation Beth Adam will be celebrating its 36th year in the coming congregational year. It's very exciting. We were a congregation that when we began, people said, we don't need another congregation in Cincinnati. The people who didn't know us, that is. But the people who knew us said we do. We need a congregation that had a bold voice, a strong voice, a voice that recognized that the Jewish community was becoming more diverse, it needed a Judaism that spoke to modernity, that embraced science, a congregation that was concerned about its past, but was more concerned about the future. What was it going to be? How are we going to relate to our descendants? That we created a Judaism that's vibrant and vital and that is meaningful. Too often people said Judaism really became overly simplistic. It didn't deal with the great issues. And we tried to bring that back into what we were doing here at Congregation Beth Adam. About 8 years ago, actually about 9 years ago, as the internet was just beginning to really sort of come online, if you will, we recognized that there was a need and an opportunity to reach people beyond the walls of our synagogue, beyond Cincinnati, in fact. And that's how ourjewishcommunity.org came into existence. It was a way to bring people together around the world, some of you watching live, others I know watching archives. It's an opportunity to be participants in this very bold, dynamic Judaism, a Judaism that's not afraid to ask difficult questions, and sometimes recognizes that the questions, the answers that we get in our generation is going to be different than the answers that our ancestors had. So I'm delighted you're here. Tonight, obviously, I'm doing the service alone. Sometimes there are others with me. Tonight, it's my night to be with you. I'm going to read the candle lighting and then talk about our topic for this evening. And Sam's on working both the computer and the board. And if you have questions as it goes along, you can write them in, and he's going to shout them out if there are questions that speak to the theme of what we're doing. So let's get the candles lit, and then we'll go from there. On Shabbat, we light the candles. Candles bring forth light, illuminating the darkness. Candles offer us warmth, providing comfort. Candles awaken us as we reach for possibilities. As we light these candles, let us use their lights to stretch beyond ourselves, touching others, bettering our world. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or ba'Shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. So tonight, I wanted to address the topic of do you or don't you believe? That's not the question. I came to this because last week, if you joined us, you watched Bart Campolo, former evangelical minister and now a humanistic chaplain, talk about his transition in belief. He talked about moving from one God concept to another concept, and he calls himself, he uses the term atheist at this point. And I think it invoked, it raises some questions and some important issues that I want to address, and it's something that we address here at Congregation Beth Adam, about the nature of belief. before I get a little bit too far down the road, I want to tell you that if you go to bethadam.org, and you go into the About section, there's a concept, an essay we wrote about God. It's called The Concept of God. You might want to refer to it at some point and read it and learn more about it. That's a more in-depth analysis of what we're going to do tonight. But I want to address this comment. Do you or don't you believe in God? It's a question that people ask me all the time. I'll be speaking somewhere and they say, so do you or don't you believe in God? I'm guessing that some of you have been asked that very same question. Let me suggest to you that that really is a setup. It's a political question, not a religious question. In fact, I remember back when Jerry Falwell, some of you may remember the Reverend Jerry Falwell, who started the Moral Majority, was very popular, and he'd be on the morning talk shows, and he'd be on a morning talk show with a scientist. And the first thing he'd say was, do you or don't you believe in God? And the scientist was always put off balance because that question was and it was meant to put a person off balance because it's a political question, not a religious question. Why do I say that? If sitting here tonight, there was the most Orthodox Jew you can think of, and the most traditional Catholic you can think of, and the most evangelical you can think of, and the most devout Buddhist you could find, or Hindu you could find, and the most devout Shinto you could find. And you said to each one of them, do you or don't you believe in God? Most of them would say yes. What would you know about them? Would you know anything about their beliefs? They're clearly, if this group that I just described would be sitting here, they'd be garbed totally differently. They'd read different sacred texts, and they would actually believe different things about their deity. But if they all said yes and nothing else, what would you know? The answer? Only that each of them uses the word God to represent something important. Don't let somebody back you into a corner and say, do you or don't you? The religious question really is, what do you believe about God? And as one begins to address that question, there's one more opportunity for conversation. There's more nuance. There's more an opportunity to explain. And there's more of an opportunity for clarity. I have found that for some people, the term God is a meaningful, useful term that gives expression to deep-held beliefs. I've also met people with those very same beliefs who find the word God not the term that they use, that the word God represents that which they don't believe in. And I still remember sitting in a conversation where two people were arguing about whether or not they believed in God. And when I stopped having them talk about the word, but rather on their beliefs, what they found is they were in agreement on most things. So how people use the word God is more important than whether or not they use it. So last week, Bart talked about his evolution. Let's talk a little bit about some different God concepts that have existed. We're not going to get a chance in depth. I'm going to pull my iPad over here, so don't, because this is actually a full class I did, and maybe in the coming year we're going to start doing some classes online if you're interested. Let me know if you'd like to do that, a little bit more formal classes where we can do a little bit more interaction. But let's just jump through a couple concepts of God so we can begin to get some understanding of how people use it. There's something called traditional theism. Again, traditional theism. Traditional theism is is sort of the biblical concept of God, though there are actually multiple concepts of God in the Bible. Traditional theism says there's only one God, that God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing, God hears prayers, God can answer prayers, God is worthy of adoration, God is the arbiter of right and wrong. This is the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-doing, seeing God. Traditional theism. It's the God, frankly, of the traditional prayer. Praise be, O you, or Lord, praise be, O you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who commands us to do something. Sometimes it's light candles. There's different commandments that a God would do. A commanding God knows that people exist, tells people what to do, and by definition, what God commands is right. Dear Lord, I beseech you, please, my loved one is ill. Heal the one who is sick. An all-powerful God who can heal the sick or can stop the storm from rolling across the plains and destroying houses, tornadoes. Or the God who chooses to use weather to punish people for sins. This is that all-powerful God that is oftentimes referred to by typically folks who are of the fundamentalist, orthodox frame of reference. The God who wrote their sacred texts, tells them what to do, and they follow it. Why? Because God has told them to do that, because God is the arbiter of right and wrong. And everything that happens, good and bad, is put into the context of this is what God wants, because an all-powerful God could change it if he wanted. And typically that all-powerful God is referred to as a male. Now the problem arises in this traditional theism is, why do bad things happen to good people? Right? That's the title of Harold Kushner's book. It's a question that not only Rabbi Kushner asked, but scholars and theologians have asked for generations. Why do bad things happen? In traditional theism, where God is all-powerful, the people who believe in that system have to say, well, God wanted it to occur for some reason that is, one, mysterious, or that will only be revealed to us in the world to come, or that we are seeing the back of the Oriental rug and not the front. So if you look at the back of the Oriental rug, the picture makes no sense. We're seeing the back, but when you turn it over, you see this great picture. So theologians, or folks who embrace a traditional theism, have all kinds of ways of explaining why bad things happen to good people. They have to, because they can't say God is bad, and they can't say that God couldn't stop it. It was the question that was asked after the Holocaust. Richard Rubinstein wrote about that. Where was God? Why would 6 million of his chosen people, why did he allow them to die? Allow meaning the sense that if God is all-powerful and can do anything, he then should have been able to stop it. He must have allowed it to occur for a reason. Traditional theism struggles with the notion of evil, struggles with the notion of pain, struggles with the notion of something bad happening to someone good. What comes out of that, and if you watched last week's service, Bart started talking about it. His concept of God went through an evolution. And while he didn't use these particular phrases, the evolution oftentimes goes to what is called limited theism. This is what actually Harold Kushner writes quite a bit about. Other people, Milton Steinberg writes about it, other folks write about it, that God is all good. God cares, God knows what's going on, but God's not all powerful. That is a totally different theological approach. Though both people would use the term God, one approach, traditional theism, says God has the power to change things and make things happen. Somebody who is a limited theist would say, God cares. God feels bad when good people are sick and when people are injured, but God doesn't have the power to fix things, to change things. They may even say the traditional prayers, praise be, O you, our Lord our God, King of the universe, who commands us to do this or that, or I beseech you, God, please heal the sick, but they know as they're saying those words, if they're a limited theist, that God can't alter the course of nature. Traditional theism, or limited theism, is a very popular concept. Many, many people embrace it, in fact, even though they use the language of traditional theism. They use traditional theistic language to give expression to limited theism. And in fact, it's very confusing then. This is where language becomes important. The people who wrote the prayers that we read in traditional liturgy, in the traditional prayer book, believed in a God who is all-powerful. People who don't believe that, but still believe in a limited theism, then have to rework the prayers and make them mean something different. So we have two concepts so far. Traditional theism, limited theism. A third concept that people embrace, in fact, the founders of our nation embraced, was a notion called deism. Deism is the belief that God is a watchmaker of the universe, meaning that God created the universe, created the laws, and wound the universe up and set it into motion. It explains creation, it explains the rules of the universe, and it then allows for a God that has no power over what occurs. God exists, but has no power, because once the rules were set in motion, even God can't change the rules. Deism was what was very popular during the Enlightenment. It was the founders of our nation, in fact, were mostly deists. They used the term God. They believed in a concept, but it wasn't a God of right and wrong. It wasn't a God of power. It wasn't a God who judged or could be prayed to. It wasn't a God who could change the course of nature. It was essentially the God that created and built the rules upon which the universe functioned. Now, there are deists today who still may say traditional prayers, but then they have to reinterpret those prayers to mean something else. Some folks are agnostic. It's an agnostic. They say the evidence isn't clear whether there is or is not a God. There are atheists. Now, atheism is really a difficult word to define in that it's used two different ways. There is a political usage of the term, and I think it's used a lot that way. You're an atheist, you're bad. That happened during the 50s, during the Eisenhower administration, where a speechwriter associated God-fearing Americans in opposition to atheist communists. That was a political use of the term. Secondly, the word atheist technically, in philosophic structure and theological structure, means somebody who is not a traditional theist. Somebody who is a limited theist or a deist, they too would in fact be an atheist. But typically, the way the word atheist is used today is someone who says there is no such thing, or I do not believe that God exists. That person doesn't deny that the laws of nature exist. They don't deny the fact the universe exists. They simply deny the notion that that term God gives expression to their deeply held beliefs. Other terms that people may have is a pantheist. God is everything. Spinoza, some of you may want to go back and look at our service that I did with Rabbi Rachel Beit Halachmi, Rabbi Sabbath Beit Halachmi. We talked about Spinoza. He believed God and nature were essentially the same thing, that they were two different terms that represented the same idea. So here we have multiple terms: traditional theist, limited theist, deist, pantheist, all representing different kinds of approaches to God. And one of those may represent you. Some of you may say, you know what, I want to not worry so much about defining the word or using the word God. I really want to talk about ideas. And questions you might want to ask yourselves related to all the things we talked about. Does your God concept know that you exist? What do I mean by that? If you're a pantheist, God wouldn't know that you exist because nature doesn't know we exist. Nature simply is. Pantheists recognize the idea that God is neither aware of us nor self-aware. Deism, that could be possibly true too. In traditional theism and in limited theism, God would be aware of you and of self. Is God the arbiter of right and wrong? Is God by definition moral? Now here's an issue. How does this come up? It even comes up into our biblical authors. They struggled with that. There was two different stories about Abraham, the mythic father of the Jewish people. In one story, God says, kill your son. It's a horrific tale. It's theologically quite challenging. And Abraham acts on that. He acts out of a belief structure that says, by definition, God is moral and is always right, and whatever he tells you to do, by definition, is moral and always right. That was one concept. The other concept was also evoked by using Abraham again when God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And in that conversation, Abraham said, is the judge of all the universe going to deal justly? Now, it's very interesting. What that author of that particular story understood was the notion of justice existed independently of God. So already theologically, our ancestors were already grappling with the notion that maybe God isn't the arbiter, in their concept, of right and wrong. That's why Abraham was willing to stand up. He understood right and wrong differently than God did. So is God self-aware? Is God aware of the universe that exists? Is God the arbiter of right and wrong? Can God contravene the laws of nature? In deism, pantheism, God can't, even in unlimited theism, that the laws of nature are the laws of nature, and thus we must deal with them. So when people talk to you and say, oh, do you or don't you believe in God? Don't get pulled down that rabbit hole. It's not a real conversation. People really are asking you to consider really difficult, challenging questions. That's why here at Congregation Beth Adam and at ourjewishcommunity.org, we take these theological conversations very seriously because they have implications about morality. They have implications of how we cope with challenges. Remember if you haven't listened to Bart, he talked about, I understand that there isn't a life after I die. It makes this life more important. Theology shapes how we cope. It shapes how we understand the world. It shapes how we understand morality. And so that's what the questions that we like to grapple with here are so important. Additionally, what we recognize at ourjewishcommunity.org and at Congregation Beth Adam is that what we say matters. How we speak about these ideas are significant. I know I go to congregations where the rabbis will say, well, I'm a limited theist or I'm a pantheist. But they seem to always read the same words that our ancestors read that were traditional theists. And if you walk in without somebody explaining to where you are, you wouldn't know what they believed. I think clarity of belief, clear language, meaningful language that expresses who we are and what we hold deep in our hearts is essential and important. And that's what we're about here. And that's why you're, I hope, a part of this bold and strong Jewish community, a place that says what it means and means what it says, grapples with difficult ideas, and recognizes that the importance of theology infuses our lives, shapes how we cope, helps us understand right from wrong. So I'm glad that we were able to share this evening with you, that I was able to talk about this. We're going to try to do over the course of the year to come, I'm going to maybe actually begin to teach a class, make it a little bit more interactive. Some of you may have joined us when Sam Cooper was here. He wanted to ask if you wanted to do some Google Hangouts, and many people said, sure, we'd like to try that. So we're going to try that into the future. So we're going to work on that. I think there's a question. Am I right? Yeah, what's the question? Just say it aloud. It's going to be...
So, if you don't believe in a moral God, how do you develop a set of ethics?
That's a powerful question. And first of all, and we don't have a lot of time, that question implies because somebody does believe in God, they have a strong set of ethics. If you look at the behavior of people who claim to believe in God, you're hard-pressed to show that people who are, quote, God believers are more moral. All one needs to do is look at some of the atrocities that have been done in the name of God. So clearly that isn't sufficient. Moreover, if you read, and there's a class that I recently taught about sacred texts. It says in the Bible, you should beat your swords into plowshares. It also says in the Bible, you should beat your plowshares into spears. People pick and choose which verses they want. So ultimately, morality, even grounded in something called God, is a human endeavor. I think a strong morality is based, one, on that human endeavor, two, based on the notion that all human beings evolved out of nature and by definition are thus equal. And out of that equality comes sort of that core notion that we need to treat others with the equality that we expect them to treat us with. So morality arises out of that, and it's not a set of rules, it becomes more of a set of principles. That if human beings are endowed as equals, that we are endowed, no one gave it to us. It came from the very fact that we evolved out of nature and we are of the same species. If there were only, one of my professors used to play this mind game. It's sort of a philosophic practice. If only two human beings existed, they both evolved out of nature simultaneously, one couldn't claim to be king over the other. It would make no sense. One doesn't have any inherent betterness than the other. So we learn to treat each other equally. So morality begins to flow out of that process. So that's a great question and very important. So a lot of people use that, do you or don't you, and if you don't believe, you're not moral. That's mythic. That's a myth. That is a manipulation of what's going on. One only go. I just was reading the Jewish Telegraph Agency newspaper today to read about horrific things that have done within the Orthodox. I hate to say this, Orthodox Jewish community, sexual abuse that was done by people who claim to believe and claim to be traditional. Belief does not mean that somebody is more moral. Moral action is people treating each other with respect, treating each other with the recognition that we are equals, treating each other with the notion that every person has the right to define for him or herself their authenticity and their autonomy, and recognizing that what I do ends where your nose begins. Hope that answers that a little bit. So we can engage in this a little bit more if we're going to do some classes. I love this. This is the stuff that gets me excited because these are the conversations we also need to have in society. We need to have this conversation. We're a secular society, so we can talk about morality in a sophisticated way. We can't allow traditional religious beliefs to define what is and is not moral. Look what's happening in America, some of the debates that are taking place about transgender folks and gay and lesbian folks and bisexual folks, that somehow they're not to be treated like all full human beings. That's grounded in an ancient morality that didn't understand the nature of human existence, didn't understand the nature of gender. We live in a world with more understanding. I would argue that we have a greater moral responsibility because we have more insights into the world that we live. Remember, the Bible said slavery was okay. This is not a book that we should rely on to determine our future morality. It's incumbent upon us to grapple with these ideas. And I think that's one of the hopes that I have that we're doing here at our jewishcommunity.org. So we're going to end right now. If we're going to do some classes after summer's over, that'd be great. So we're going to sort of turn the page at this point and continue, because tonight is our memorial night. If you have names that you want to include, feel free to type them as I read our memorial. The cycle of life unfolds. Just as we rejoice in new life, we mourn its final ending. The inevitable death of those whose lives have touched ours. Today, we join voices with others as we say aloud the words which help us to recall those we've lost. We remember the moments we've shared, the laughter and the tears of beauty and the pain. Inevitably, as our lives intertwined, as we have touched one another, we've been influenced, changed, enriched by their presence. And so, as we mourn their loss, we celebrate their life. Thus, the cycle continues. Their lives are marking the continued unfolding of our own. We pause at this time to reflect upon those who are no longer among us. This moment of remembrance links life to life and generation to generation. Tonight, we remember those names that I've received. Harry Cohen, Marion Sidman, Mary Lou Phillips, Ignacio Israel Cruz Hernandez, Rose Dinoff. We hold those names in our hearts, and other names that are important to you. Feel free to type them. I'm not going to be able to read each one. It's a bit challenging, but hold them, share them with each other. Because there are many loved ones who no longer walk among us, who shaped us, who touched us, who gave us insights into the people that we are. We think about them. We think too about those who've died as a result of violence and terror that mar our planet. Those who've died as a result of natural disaster, and those who've died as a result of neglect or genocide. Those who've died trying to escape oppression and died on the seas looking for freedom. We think about those refugees. We think about those nameless people, those people whose names aren't remembered. We have to recall them, and we need to act. We think about all those who no longer walk among us. Death cannot take that which is locked in our hearts. With our tears and our sorrow, we remember. With our courage and our strength, we do not forget. Acts of kindness, deeds of courage will remain. Beauty created, wisdom shared is not lost. With our tears in our sorrow, we remember. Im demaot be'einenu, be'et evlenu, nishmor al zecher achuvenu. With our tears in our sorrow, we remember. Zeker tzadik livracha. May the memory of good people bless our days. Let the Sabbath be a time for believing in what could be and seeing with new eyes. In this serious world, let us take ourselves less seriously. In these harsh times, let us listen for a soothing word. While the world around us unfolds in an instant, let us judge each other a little more slowly. Let the Sabbath shine a light into a corner of ourselves where hope is renewed. Let us remember a reason to be joyful and a way to be gentle. Let the Sabbath be a time for opening up. Let us find strength in our dreams and trust in our strength. We're going to continue with our challah. So if you have some bread or toast, cracker, goldfish, whatever you want, something. It's okay, whatever. Just imagine you have it. In Jewish tradition, we share the challah as we celebrate the Shabbat. We are reminded that challah, a twisted loaf of bread, sustains and nurtures the life of our bodies. May the sharing of this challah sustain and nurture our hunger for knowledge and our understanding of the world around us. May the sharing of this challah sustain and nurture our connection to those close by and those separated by distance and by time. May the sharing of this challah encourage us to reach out to those across our rooms, across our hallways, across our desks, across the miles. May the sharing of the challah strengthen and enrich the coming week. Baruch Hamal Kapeinu, blessed is the work of our hands. Baruch Hazon Ha'adam, blessed is the vision of our mind. Baruch Lechem Ha'aretz, blessed is the bread of the earth. And then if you have some wine or some juice, join with me. On Shabbat, it's custom to share wine and juice with family, friends, and community. It reminds us that it's not enough for us to quench our physical thirst. We must nourish our spirit as well. As we celebrate Shabbat, may this wine or this juice remind us to live our lives to the fullest and to embrace the joys and pleasures that life offers. Bruchim ha'chayim ba'olam, blessed is the life within the world. Bruchim ha'chayim ba'adam, blessed is the life within each person. So we say, l'chaim, to life. Quick announcements or two. Always check our Facebook page. At our jewishcommunity.org, our Facebook page. Check our website. Check out what's going on. If you didn't get to see last week's service with Bart, it's here in archives. You can watch that service. You can also watch the interview that I did with him. Join us next week. I'm working on if I'm going to be doing and who our guest is, or I may be doing a pre-recorded service as June's coming and summer's is encroaching. People who have been doing services with me, some of them are out of town, and we're just trying to work out the details. We'll be doing brand new services or services you've not seen through June, end of June, between July and part of August. We're going to be on air in pre-recorded and in archives, and then we'll come back sometime in late August into fresh services again. So check out our jewishcommunity.org, our Facebook page. Write me, rabbi@ourjewishcommunity.org. I always love hearing from you. People have written some great notes. It really helps me to understand what you're all interested in and where we're going as a community. And as we always say here, may we know blessings those who are near, and may we know blessings those who are far. And may the Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. Shabbat Shalom.